Oh yeah, I saw this thing. It was late, something, and somebody said, "Oh, I just read the Cliff Notes, talking about some great piece of literature." And I can't, who writes these Cliff Notes? I have read some of them, and you just go, "This person has to be fired." The world for whom Cliff Notes were enough, getting by, getting on, at what? What was going on with Richard Burton, the actor? What was happening there? What was Elizabeth short of? Were they two rocks in the Mediterranean who, after all the sirens had passed by, were left alone and fell drunk into each other's arms in Rome? Were they talents that needed to destroy themselves like Proteus, fall into a cauldron that might allow them to climb out anew, to shed their skin? Or when they look across the smoky, boozy Colosseum and see only the other monster, do they realize they have met their match, lovely in their loneliness? See, I was a great fan. I am a great fan of Richard Burton. He was a big influence on me as a kid. I was in Edinburgh when he died in 1984. I collapsed walking down the street when I heard it on the radio. Anyway, it seems to me, and he's instructive, that whatever he was, a great talent, certainly, but he was somebody, an archetype, like a masculine shark moving forwards and consuming everything that came his way. And he'd been encouraged to do this by his family and by the rush to get out of of the world into which he was born, though not entirely. He took much of it with him. He remained a Welsh miner forever, really. And that's one of his great beauties. But, to go from Sybil to Elizabeth to whatever it was that he was doing with everybody else, just this, and the game that he played in order to do it, that Lauren Bacall clearly didn't buy a minute of. It's fascinating. And how that archetype leads a life and leaves behind a legacy that still attracts so many people. And, created that great wise face and that great voice and that affinity with the great poets. It's quite marvelous. It's not everything, though. And it had its cost, obviously. Is it in Virginia Woolf, Who's Afraid Of? Elizabeth was so much more real than he was. And then I thought, aren't we men brought up to be phony? Aren't we paid for our performance, our unreality? Is that our problem? I've seen it. Did Cary Grant know this? What was he up to? Wasn't the Brando thing always the man, this man in struggle, liberated to be Don Corleone or Terry Malloy? In the many great performances he gave, I always felt that there was something in that human being that was so keen and zealous to explore these parts of the self that the parts offered him. Why does Melvyn Bragg gush so about Burton? I think he misses something, a lost or missed manhood. I think that's what every cultural intellectual feels somehow about the son of a miner. And how quiet and secure is manhood, secure enough to be quiet? Wasn't Burton a quiet wreck stranded on a lonely beach at last, worth admiring? Are we in a crisis again? Lawrence van der Post wrote about the crisis in Africa in 1966. Quote, "This failure has come about, I believe, through the failure of the individual to recognize the importance of first things in themselves. We cannot achieve publicly what we have not accomplished within the private bounds of our own personality." The crisis in Africa, where he was from, was the post-colonial one that is still upon us, Gaza, etc. He feels that Very many good people on both sides were aware of the cauldron of cares, resentments, and fears colonialism had inevitably generated and had some very useful ideas of how to resolve them, but the intent and the action didn't sink. They seldom do. We all know, or should know, or of a certain age we know, about Che Guevara. And even smarter ones will know about Rosa Luxemburg, how they lived, how they passed. She, a giant for me. He was a brand at least. Do we just forget them? Do these people just disappear? Where are they today? People with the greatest of natural instincts, probably, but trapped in cultural insanity, could only progress by personally stepping into the individuated life. You have to go away, or in a sense, to recognize the difference between being a Muslim and being born one. There is a difference. To allow there is a huge difference. In this sense, there is no such thing as the monotheist philosopher. They have passed the aspiration, the personality, the discussion, the judgment, the contemplation of goodness to him upstairs. Socrates' good man was the individuated one, the one who knew himself. Van der Post was a devotee of Carl Jung and his conception of individuation. A point in life, I think, shortcut, a point in life where one becomes fully oneself. A thing, moreover, that anyone can achieve and should. Any musician, any truck driver, any street sweeper, any PhD, any farmer. The quote is from his book, The Dark Eye in Africa. He confronts much that ails us in this and other remarkable books. Venture into the Interior, I think it was called, The Lost World of the Kalahari, The Heart of the Hunter, all about the Bushman of the Kalahari. Van der Post has been discounted by some literati since his death, but I operate on the same basis as we do with the Bible. We have no idea about Paul's personal life. We know much about Socrates' personal behaviors, which would appall us, trust me. Were he tried in modern America for blasphemy, the jury would condemn him unanimously in a minute and still find him useful, or should do. The back and forth recently about the subway riders and fear, Neely and Penny, Neely black and crazy, Penny blonde and a marine, says a lot about individuation and colonialism. Pakistani grooming and rape in northern England too. Glenn Greenwald's take on the Penny affair was stunning to me. He's a man I respect. He seemed to say that Penny did what thousands of subway riders wanted to do but haven't, and that was his justification, that he was an avenger of the great collective fearful of NYC subway riders. And the individuated person will recognize this for what it is, Nazi. I ride the subway, not every day, but it had seemed to me, rather like gun ownership, that one would demand of the state a solution. Have suggestions as a citizen, do what the guardian angels in the 80s did, rather than, and I believe that it had no murder in that, did rather than living, no deaths, did rather than living in fear or buying a gun. This allowance allows me two things. I understand the decision to find Penny a hero and wanting to own a gun, surrendering to fear and its solutions, not a facing of either the irrational parts of fear or the rational good sense parts. The handgun will not keep you safe, and Daniel Penny will not address mental health, etc. The colonial connection is now personal. One lives in New York, a lovely place, but of harsh inequality, where some people live very brutal lives on streets, sleeping rough, begging, and are instantly threatening to those doing well, making it, but stressed by the precarious process. The police are armed when they are around. Nice people often, but I am white. The natural humanity I get caught up in every time I go into the city seems as subjective and as imaginative as the fearfulness of others. In truth, I don't sense much fear in Manhattan. I never have, but the projection from Texas is overwhelming, from Westchester, anywhere not actually there. I lived in Atlanta for 20 years. I have friends elsewhere who wouldn't dream of living somewhere so dangerous. A friend of mine believes the Palisades Inferno was intentional, that the low water pressure in the hydrants was intentional. Everybody has a right to their own inner landscape, but while Elon Musk twits that Pakistani Muslims are immoral monsters, does he forget Jeffrey Epstein, Prince Andrew, and the white Frenchman who raped Gisèle Pelicot? The horrible behaviors are happening, but they're not colonial, committed by the colonized. A friend asked me, post-mortem LA, did I think it was arson? My first thought was, why? Are we sure that this random arsonist, who seems one way or another to be responsible for everything that goes wrong ever, Newsom, Bass, capitalism, Democrats, Republicans, why were the hydrants empty? Well, LA should be a desert. Without the redirected water from hundreds of miles away, it would be one. There is drought, has been for a decade. Like Florida and hurricanes, LA is a disaster waiting to happen, and the Santa Ana winds, and voila. Of these truths, these facts, these factors, we are all victims, and we will continue to be. We are not bushmen or nomads in yurts, aborigines in Australia, the greatest adapters to harsh climate in human history. We build brick and concrete houses, then we air condition them, and then complain when a hurricane takes down something meant to be blown down. We build brick and concrete and steel lives, and when the inevitable happens, when nature revolts, these days we find a person to blame. No, I don't think that Gavin Newsom or Karen Bass, are Pericles, but they are no more to blame for natural disasters than Putin is. I know, you'd like to go there, but stop. Pericles was not to blame for the plague. Climate change, well, dears, we are all responsible for that. No ifs, ands, or buts. I sat around dinner tables in the late 60s listening to MIT graduates predict almost exactly what has happened. But to be consistent, I'd not blame us either. The industry that poisoned our rivers and lakes made all the stuff that stuffs our houses, that we bought to fill that void. Mostly because blame is useless. I might even think that since a planet without our mucking it up has been hotter and colder by far, I might think also that since a planet, ours, without our mucking it up, without our even being around, has been much hotter and much colder by far, we might just lay down the pitchforks and decide not to help nature and her diabolical cycles. Deal with the problem without indulging in blame. The blaming is just a character flaw, really. The flaw has gripped our culture. Nobody started the fire in Los Angeles, or we all did. To tilt again at Elon and his ilk. Islam is to blame for grooming and raping young white girls, like English culture is to blame for Prince Andrew, America for Jeffrey Epstein, and Christian France for Gisèle Pelicot's tormentors. See what white men did to young, black, and native girls for a couple of hundred of years with impunity. Blame does seem to be in our nature. My friend was astute when she asked about the LA arsonist. When I said unlikely that there was a single arsonist, she said, what about Hitler? After a stunned moment, I saw the connection. Every awfulness has an individual as cause, an evil one. How Abrahamic. How silly, how seductive. All of us made Hitler. We will make him again. And he was the blamer-in-chief of his day.